It's my pleasure to be here to have a mini climate change debate with Guy McPherson, world famous Guy McPherson, Professor Emeritus at the University of Arizona, and Paul Beckwith, my favorite Canadian from the University of Ottawa. Paul, you're in the department there?
Department of Geography. Yeah.
Department of Geography.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for attending. We've had a chance to visit the last day or two, and these gentlemen are happy to enter the first climate change mini debate. So,
And tell us again who you're representing.
okay, thanks, Guy. My name is Martin Halliwell, and I'm a business guy, and I recently started a nonprofit charity called CANSI, Climate and Nature Society, Engineers and Technicians. It's my belief that engineers can make a difference. On this issue, I believe Paul Beckwith and I might align. And on this issue, I believe Guy may feel that our predicament does not require or is not yet in sight of technology that can help. And you know, there's a strong case to be made for both men's positions. Paul, tell me, how do you feel about geoengineering? And I'm going to ask Guy that because today we heard that, in his opinion, it was a non-starter.
Yeah. I used to actually think it was a crazy, idea, but the climate system is changing so fast. We've kind of gone off the cliff, and I think the only chance, in order to go back to the cliff, or at least to have a fighting chance to stabilize the climate system, I think we need to take drastic action, and that includes methods to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And that's the only thing that will address the ocean acidification problem. And I think we also have to cool the Arctic. If we get the Arctic warming so that we lose sea ice, the extreme weather events are going to amplify greatly, and the cost to society is going to be enormous. So I think we need to, apply solar radiation management techniques and carbon dioxide removal techniques in order to stabilize the climate system. That's not to say that we need to slash fossil fuel emissions. And we'll know that governments are serious about that when we see fossil fuel subsidies go away. Yeah.
If I could summarize, then, you're a believer in geoengineering.
Well, I think it's absolutely necessary. If it will work or not, that's another question. I think we have to try.
Now, my limited knowledge would understand geoengineering to be the seeding of the atmosphere, or the dimming of the heat, if that's a proper expression for it, in terms of aerosol sprays. But you regard geoengineering as perhaps this carbon removal, so it's a broad term.
Yeah, it's a broad term, and it's been kind of poisoned, I think, by the online anyway, by the idea of chemtrailers, people saying that we're already doing it for nefarious purposes.
It's not true that the U.S. government has had all the patents on such technology since the Vietnam War, and it actually used it in subsequent events?
I'm
So
not.
you wouldn't be up to speed on that?
Well, I don't think it's happened. I don't think it's. I mean, there's lots of patents on it. I'm on email exchanges with many scientists that are working in the area of looking at carbon dioxide removal, looking at solar radiation management, at different places around the planet. So I kind of, get the gist of what they talk about and discuss, and
So just hold there for a sec, Paul.
Yeah.
Guy, your thoughts on the whole term geoengineering, and then also perhaps the atmospheric cooling. I believe, listening to your facts and your science, connecting the dots, that we have a serious risk with methane in the Arctic, and that for me, logically as an engineer, we have to try and get the Arctic to grow ice. So, is this not a direction that you would support?
Well, I'm a huge fan of the Arctic refreezing and getting volume back up to where it was in the 1970s, or better yet, in the 1400s. Geoengineering, it is a broad term that has been applied to too many different kinds of activities. At some level, we've been geoengineering since we turned the first shovel, since we turned over the first blade of earth and released carbon dioxide and methane in the process. And certainly we're geoengineering the planet when we crank up our internal combustion engines and we turn on the lights to fire up the coal-fired power plant. But I think what we're talking about here in this context is something new and different. Geoengineering meaning do something to reverse what the past geoengineering has done, has brought us to. And I think the problem is all this doing. We keep doing and doing and doing, and it's that doing that has us at the edge of the abyss here. And so maybe continued tinkering at a large scale isn't the answer we're wishing for. I don't think we can predict the results reliably of solar radiation management, for example. And that's the primary approach that was criticized by the United States National Academy of Sciences in 2015 and a European body of similar stature. So, if these two large multidisciplinary organizations conclude that geoengineering is not likely to improve the situation, then I'm inclined to agree. It's the recent paper by Hansen and maybe a couple of dozen colleagues, several anyway, calling climate change a young people's burden and calling for the requirement for negative CO2 emissions or geoengineering at some sort of large scale. And I think this is just desperate times calling for desperate measures, continued doing so that we can keep doing what we've been doing for some 267 years since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. I don't see things positive coming out of that, but maybe.
Well, if we have a methane problem in the next few years, is nuclear winter better?
Well, that's the thing.
We talked today about that.
Right. I mean, maybe we are at this really, truly desperate state, and methane isn't necessarily a problem for the future, it's a predicament for today. There's more than 240% atmospheric methane today relative to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So it's a big, big deal, the amount of methane in the atmosphere today. And I haven't heard anybody talk about a way to sequester methane from the atmosphere. And as near as I can tell, we don't have the technology currently to sequester carbon dioxide at large scale from the atmosphere and store it somewhere safe. I think we have just waited too long to take relevant action in light of warnings we've been given for 30 years or so. But should we do something? I don't know. It's doing that got us into this mess. Maybe we should just stop. Maybe we as humans should just stop assuming that we are the smartest species on the planet and we know what's best for every other species, and so we need to tinker here and move this and do that. Human beings, before we became humans doing, would sit. We'd just sit and meditate and spend hours and hours every day doing what we would call nothing. Today, that makes us nervous. That makes us anxious to sit and to not work, to not do some productive activity. It seems absurd. But it wasn't that long ago. That's what pretty much everybody did. Maybe we should try that.
Yeah, we've been doing some of that earlier.
Yeah, I'd like to just add, one of the things that is really, a sore point with me is that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and of course we have the COP23 going on right now in Bonn, they're not being upfront and honest with people, because their scenarios, their low emission scenarios, assume that we'll be doing geoengineering. They'll assume that we'll have methods to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And they have a favorite horse that they're backing, and they call it BECCS, or bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. And it would require an enormous amount, converting an enormous amount of agricultural land to just growing things that grow fast, and then burning that material and capturing the carbon and burying it. And they're not upfront with they're not saying that, you know, if we continue with just cutting emissions and so on, forget about 2 degrees, forget about 1.5 degrees, we're talking about 2.5, 3 degrees, and these are the implications, you know, mass failures of crops, and, you know, mass
Which sense,
problems, right? Turmoil on the planet. But they're not being honest. They're saying we've got this magic technology which doesn't exist yet.
So you're upset at the media?
Well, I just think that they need to be honest, and they need to tell people, look, we're in trouble, and the only possible way to back off is to employ geoengineering techniques. And right now they're just talking about carbon dioxide removal. But there's a lot of people that behind the scenes are talking about cooling, solar radiation management. And I can guarantee you that we need to do both, and that both will be done. Now, whether they work and whether we should do them is another question, but I think human nature means that we're going to try it, right? I mean, you have to weigh doing, not doing it, okay? I mean, people say, okay, doing it could be a problem, you know, it could affect the monsoons, for example, it could cause problems, but not doing it, we're you know, you can see the problems that are happening now, and there's no new normal. This is going to get a lot worse as we lose sea ice in the Arctic, like the extreme weather events. And, you know, I think, you know, I mean,
Well, is it fair to say, Paul,
yeah.
that you actually may be more closely aligned with Guy's forecast of extinction, near-term extinction, by 2030, let's say, you know, for all intents and purposes?
Yeah.
He's not saying that everybody's
Yeah.
gone,
Yeah.
but he's saying that for all intents and purposes, we're gonna see population decline. Would you
Yeah,
agree with that?
I mean, yes, I mean, not by 2030, I would say, but...
Population's not gonna decline by 2030.
well, I mean, this is very close, right? I mean, it's like, I just can't, I don't know, I'm guessing one way or the other. You know, it's really bad. We need to declare a climate emergency. If we don't do anything, it's going to get worse and worse. And
Do you agree that at 4 degrees, we
so
lose the ability to grow
I
grapes?
think 4 degrees is a total disaster for humanity. I mean,
Yet without geoengineering, it looks
Right.
highly likely.
so I think, you know, if we climb a degree or above what we are now, or 2 degrees, and we see all the negative effects, I think we're going to try to seed the atmosphere with sulfur dioxide, you know, on an emergency basis over the matter of a few months to try to cool the planet, like volcanoes do, large volcanoes do, or something. Like, we'll get really desperate and start doing desperate things. I don't think we're just going to sit around and drop like flies. But, you know, this is a very dire and emergency situation, and we're not meeting it. We're just, you know, we're just ignoring it until it really does affect people. And it's affecting people. I mean, the German report last week, 76% of flying insects we've reduced the biomass of flying insects in Germany in a nature preserve by 76% in 27 years. And this was a very extensive study. So, you know, it's probably, a lot of it's related to pesticides probably, but also shifting phenologies with temperature and rapid temperature rise, change in rainfall regimes, etc. Those are all behind it. But we can't tolerate these type of numbers without eventually collapsing. Like, this is a horrifying statistic. Is it copied around the world? We don't have studies to show one way or the other, but anecdotally, I mean, people know they don't see moss, they don't, you know, they drive at night in rural areas and you don't get your car smeared with bugs on your windshield and headlights like we used to. I used to drive from Ottawa to Toronto, my car would be covered. Hardly see an insect now on this drive, and this is happening around the world. People have been telling me the same thing around the world. So, you know, it's happening. I mean, we're killing off our ecosystems, as Guy is saying. So, you know, he just thinks I think that people, you know, can be so stupid and then suddenly wake up and say, you know, hey, we're in serious trouble, let's do something different. And all he's saying is that, no, we're stupid and we're just going to keep going until we're off the cliff. So we're not so much different in what we're saying, right? So, I don't know, I mean,
Yes.
it's, what do you think?
At some points, things converge.
Yeah.
I think
I,
we're actually very clever. And that's a problem. We're too clever by half, as the expression goes. That we have, or as Dilworth says in his book, Dilworth? I think that's right, Craig Dilworth, we're too smart for our own good. By which I mean too clever for our own good. So we're really clever at fixing things and kicking the can down the road and making things more comfortable for us, particularly as individuals, and not thinking a few generations out about where that goes. So, you know, you keep kicking the can down the road, and pretty soon you got a really dented can.
Yeah, like what's this about, you know, we've got 10 years to solve a problem, and this is, you know, you show some quotes from the 80s and 90s, and then, you know, 30 years later, people are saying, well, we've got 10 years to solve the problem.
Right.
Like
We always have 10 years to solve it.
Right? Same sort of thing with oil. We'll run out of oil in 10 years. Well, and we'll get fusion to solve our energy problems in 50 years and 25 years, and it's always 25 years out.
Let me ask a personal question.
Yeah.
You have 3 kids.
Yes.
Is this a battle for them that you fight every day? And I admire you, Paul, for the battle you do fight every day.
Not every day. I mean, if I'm really annoyed at them, right? If they really do nasty things, and then I say, you know, yeah, let's just, you know, get my
Future
revenge.
generations screw you.
Yeah, yes. So it really depends. Like, this is a question of, you know, economists struggle with the question, you know, how do we value human life in the future? Because if there's no value on human life in the future, then what does climate change matter? Right? If we're not worried about the longevity of our species, I mean, we all have this urge to procreate, to propagate our genes into the future, and we have this sort of collective view that we want humanity to sort of continue. But in a lot of the models, I would say that economists don't value human life in the future at all. It's all now in the present, what's happening. So therefore, we don't address this problem, and people don't recognize this problem. So I must say that, you know, when you have kids, I was told when I had my first kid, well, everything's different now in your life. You join the parent club, you know, and you're in the parent club, and it's the way you meet other parents, and, you know, through your kids, right? You're driving them places, and it's part of your social life changes because of your kid, right? Your life changes. You know, we all try to protect our kids, we all try to provide for them and make sure they have a future. So, yeah, I mean, there's a big component in me. I mean, some people say that the only difference between he and I is that because he doesn't have kids, he can go around saying we're all going extinct. Whereas if I went around saying that, I've got my kids to deal with, and my wife and other people and friends, and I think, like, you know, is there truth in this? And I'm not really sure. I mean, maybe it's some subconscious thing, but I'm always trying to figure out, you know, we've created this mess for ourselves, and we're being very stupid collectively, and we don't need to continue being very stupid.
But let's get to the heart of the choice that we all make.
Can I comment just
Go ahead.
briefly? You know, I have young people in my life. I have a 12-year-old who lives on the property where I live in Belize, who's very dear to me. Yeah, I think he's the smartest person, the most intelligent person I've ever met in my life. And he's hilarious on purpose, unlike most of us, who are unintentionally hilarious. And I love Marshall Masterson. He's just a wonderful human being. I think the bigger difference between us is in our backgrounds. I'm a conservation biologist,
Yes.
and you have this engineering background that I lack. And so I think that influences our perspective perhaps as much, maybe more, than the children issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's physics, it's engineering, it's technical. I mean, I've tried to learn, you know, what I can about ecosystems and so on, but it's not what I studied in university. So, you know, engineers try to problem solve. Right?
I'm much the same way. I'm an engineer.
You try to find a solution, you know. You see something and you wonder what its function is and how could you design it to improve it, and, you know, you're always trying to solve problems, I guess.
Right.
So we don't see this as a predicament, I guess, right? We see it as a problem, maybe.
Probably because our egos don't allow us to see predicaments.
Well, that's possible too, right? Yes.
Well, I think that's pretty deeply ingrained in the human psyche too.
Yeah.
Because after all, we've encountered all these really thorny issues in the past, and we got through them.
Yeah.
We got through world wars without managing to kill off, Kurt Vonnegut late in his life said that civilization has faced down two major events. The civilization tried to commit suicide twice, he says, World War I and World War II.
Mm.
And now with peak oil or net energy decline, he says civilization is facing its third attempt to commit suicide.
Limits to growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean,
Let me ask a spiritual
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Are you a believer in some form of the soul living on, some form of life after death? Sorry, we never talked about this.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We said any question is fair
Yeah.
game. So
I think it's an interesting question to explore relative
Guy,
to extinction.
would you like to answer that? Sorry.
Yeah, we'll go to Guy first. You think of your answer.
Yeah,
It's been a while since anyone asked you that. Clearly.
Yeah.
I think I asked Guy this earlier today. But
Yeah, as a scientist, I feel very strongly that when I'm conducting scientific activities, I'm an agnostic. There are some questions science cannot answer. The process of science cannot answer issues that deal with paranormal or supernatural phenomena. So when I'm conducting my scientific research, it's not a personal question, it's a professional question. I'm agnostic. So in this conversation with respect to climate change, with respect to my scientific, which you might call rationalist activities, I'm agnostic. In my personal life, if we're going to get personal, and I don't mind, I range somewhere between an indifferent agnostic and a militant anti-theist. Because I see theism propped up as some sort of
stoicism.
some sort of one-size-fits-all response to any issue that arises. So when I sit next to women of a certain age on the airplane, they always tell me something like, God won't let this happen. Now, how could that be? Do you think he's going to be impressed with what we've done with the place so far? No, we've just trashed the joint. And we're trying to impress this thing, this guy, this whatever. So, but most times I'm just sort of indifferent. Most time I'm just an indifferent agnostic, and other people's spirituality has no effect on me until the Jehovah's Witnesses show up proselytizing at the door, and then it gets personal.
Yeah.
But and that goes beyond religion or beyond what we think of as religion. There's lots of.
My question to you would be:
Yeah.
Would it be logical that someone with a belief in an afterlife would perhaps struggle less with the question of near-term human extinction? This is a generality, not perhaps to be answered in your context.
I mean, I look at it in a number, throughout my life. I mean, I grew up, believing in a higher power, but not being overly religious. I had friends who I call them Bible thumpers, right? And they were always trying to get me to be more involved. I mean,
So they were evangelical,
right,
sort of pushing you.
Yes, they would be pushing me, and then I decided, okay, you know what? I'm gonna read them. So this friend was always quoting stuff, always and I had no idea what he was talking about. So I thought, okay, great. So I thought, I'm gonna read the Bible cover to cover, and I did it within about 3 or 4 days. And for about a week, I was an expert. I knew more about it than he did. And then, of course, if you learn something in 3 or 4 days, it's gone in a couple of weeks,
yes.
and then a year later, you know nothing, right? So
Is that like your videos? No, I'm like.
so yes. So, but when you look at some of the things that are done by humans in the name of religion, like every side in every war that has ever been fought has had God on their side. Right, so how is that logical? I mean, how can God be on both sides, right? I mean, there's some things, we like to believe there's a higher power, there's something spiritual, and there's also, from a purely logical point of view, there's a decision matrix, right? You could set up a matrix, a 2x2 grid, and then one axis you have God exists, God doesn't exist, and then the other axis you have I believe in God and I don't believe in God. right? So if you don't believe in God and there is a God, you're screwed, basically, right?
Yeah, Pascal's wager.
Right, Pascal's wager. So you might as well believe in God, because if he exists, it's great, and if he doesn't exist, you haven't lost anything,
That's
right? So just by pure logic, have that choice. Call it God. I mean, how can there be so many different gods, right? There's different gods.
But we
different
don't confuse religion with
right.
belief in
Yeah,
God.
yeah. So no.
We get
So
tangled
I
up in our
think
displeasure with man's version
yeah.
of.
I mean, things that we don't understand. I mean, we attribute things like randomness and chance and stuff. We often invoke God, and God is on our side or not on our side, and it's just a statistical, random sort of thing, right? So, I do think that there's something,
You're a physicist.
Yes.
So you must have an understanding of quantum physics.
Yes, quantum
and
physics.
the fact that
yes.
if we change our vibration, we can often change our result. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and when we measure something, we can't measure, for example, position and momentum simultaneously. If we measure one, then we don't know what the other one is. There's a certain uncertainty, Heisenberg's uncertainty.
Maybe there's an
But
uncertainty to the climate
this is at
change.
the level of quantum physics, though.
Yes,
This
but-
does not necessarily apply at the level of
Right,
of our
right.
daily lives, of a car moving down the road.
Yeah, well, I mean, it applies for light, for example, right? I mean,
Right,
we
sure.
can think of light as waves or as particles, and there's this duality.
Right.
And this gets very
Particles and waves.
philosophical as
Yeah.
well,
Oh,
right?
of course.
I mean,
Of course it does.
I mean, the physicists we've called the particle the God particle, basically, right?
But we
so-
can measure the position and the mass.
Yes, of large objects.
Of these
yes.
large objects like
Yes,
this
yes, that's right.
simultaneously. So
Yes.
I see Heisenberg's principle misapplied on a regular basis.
It is.
As
Yeah.
just to make the statement, we can't really know anything.
Exactly.
We can know a lot.
Yes,
we do know
yes,
a lot.
We can. Yeah. So I don't know if I've answered the question.
No, that's very good.
Um,
We talked earlier today about your love of teaching, and would it be fair to say that that's probably your biggest disappointment from walking away from Empire is the inability to reach the young people the way you did before?
Absolutely, no question about it. I created relationships that lasted a long time and were very deeply and intimately meaningful. And I'm unable to do that now. I can go around and give a presentation here and there. I interact with people like I do with you for 3 or 4 days. It's not the same. It's not the same at all. To catch somebody when they're at such a critical stage in their own personal development, philosophically, emotionally, psychologically, intellectually, is really, really powerful and fun, and you feel like you're actually having an influence on an individual human being during the formative time in their lives. And it is, and we remember going to college,
Yeah.
and it was formative for us. We were out of our parents' line of sight for the first time for an extended period of time. We're becoming adults, and with all the awkwardness that comes with that, and discovering what it means to be me, independent from parental judgment and advice. And it's crazy. It's just crazy. And so when you get to interact with people who are going through this and they're experiencing so many firsts, they're not just away from home. Their grandparents are dying, one before every exam. Their parents are getting divorced, or that relationship is falling apart. Their friends are falling in love, maybe they are too. Their friends are having children, they're getting married. These are really critical life and death moments, and it's an opportunity for me to relive those life and death moments that I don't have anymore.
Today we had the opportunity to speak at McMaster, your alma mater,
yeah.
and that's in Hamilton, Ontario. And my sense was in front of that group of young people, it was fortunate enough that we were able to get an engineering class at that time to listen in. I felt that the energy was like perhaps old days for you.
Mm-hmm.
And
It
it was probably the kind of venue that you would enjoy. Because I certainly have seen, adults disrespect your message, which is intended to be accurate. if nothing else. I think that's what you aspire to as a scientist. I admire your work. I've followed your work for a number of years, and I can honestly say to everybody who may be listening to this video one day that Guy has helped encourage me to actually do something that follows my passion, which is to continue to work as an engineer towards lowering footprint and collectively trying to convince young engineers to not work for the rich man, to work for the planet. And perhaps we would have had a different result. I do still say there's 1% hope. That's maybe the way I'm built. Maybe it's my spirituality, in a sense.
You know, what was missing today in that group of people, including a bunch of young people, was I couldn't look up and say, Mary, what's your thoughts about that? John, you have something you want to say. I didn't have that personal connection with them. I didn't know their hopes and their dreams and their wishes for their future as I did with all the students in my classes. And I knew them well enough to know not only their names, what they wanted to become when they grew up. And that's huge. That's huge. You can actually establish a relationship, a lasting relationship with somebody once you know them as an individual. You know, students don't care what you know until they know that you care about them. And I cared about my students. I knew their names, all of them, by the second day of class. And so that's just common courtesy, right? To know the names of the people you're interacting with on a regular basis. And so there's nothing like that.
Yeah,
In my
I agree.
experience, there's just nothing
I have
like
the same
that.
experience. I mean, teaching is so rewarding, right? It's just so, I don't know, there's just, it energizes you. You might have a crappy day, you go to your class and you're on top of the world. After, and you can tell, they get engaged, they ask you questions. You know, class ends and there's like 10 or 15 people crowding around asking about this or that, or
Because they care. They have the future and they care about it.
right. And when you're teaching a topic like this, like climate, or it's very relevant, I mean, to their everyday lives. Or they're reading stories about it, they're hearing things on the web, some of it accurate, some of it not. And, you know, you're just trying to train them to be sort of critical thinkers, like critical, you know, not just to read things and like to think about things sort of not on a superficial level, because we're getting very superficial, right? I mean, we have so much news crossing our screens. You know, we're getting lots of information, but we're not processing that information. We need filters to process it, and we need to weigh it and consider it in the things that we know and have this wisdom, right? I mean, the wise human, right? And we've lost this. We're clever, as you say. I really like that sort of the idea. You know, we're clever, but we're not wise, because, you know, so what can we do to turn this around, I guess, is the thing, right? Because, you know, we're not doing a very good job right now. We're doing a terrible job. In fact, if we wanted to think about what we could do to make things worse than what they are, it can be difficult, actually, to think of, you know, at least in the U.S. and right now.
Well, you know, I can
in the
honestly say
political
it
system.
would make it worse if both of you two stop doing what you're doing. And I regard you both as great teachers. You've been a good example for me, and continue to do that service, Paul. And on behalf of CanC, I'll sign off for another day.
Thank you, Martin.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure interacting with you over the course of the last few days and before that in preparation for this little tour.
Thank you.
And,
Yes.
and as always,
you guys.
Paul,
Yes.
it's been an adventure.
It's always a lot of fun. Yeah.
Okay, cut.
In the scene.